to everybody for attending. I'll do the welcome in a moment. You may notice I'm logged in twice, but I will only vote once, so I can see the chat as well as people's hands when they put them up, so I can indicate who's next to speak. So welcome everybody, observers and any members of the public. The agenda was published on the 22nd of September and distributed to members. The agenda pack is available on the council's website. Can I ask please that people turn off all videos and put yourselves on mute. Schools Forum members, please only use video and microphones when speaking. This helps with the background noise, the call quality and anything disrupting the meeting. When I invite a member to speak, please clearly state who you are for the benefit of all to help identify who is speaking. If referring to a report, please refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. Can forum members only use the meeting chat function only for the purpose of the meeting, primarily to indicate myself the chair that you wish to speak, or the hand facility in Microsoft Teams. Anything in the chat will not be included in the minutes, so please use the raise your hand function to indicate that you wish to speak. There is a facility in Microsoft Teams under the ellipsis button called Turn on Live Captions, which provides subtitles on the screen. The meeting will be recorded, as with other public meetings of the council. The recording will be made available following the meeting on the Schools Forum website. We will be using AI to support the minutes of the meeting. This means there'll be some emphasised and repeated phrases. Please introduce yourself the first time you speak to assist the tool in identifying different speakers. All recordings and transcripts, including those using AI, are subject to the council data protection policy. To help the flow of the meeting, we will be using a single slide pack to take us through the agenda. And that now brings us to item 1, apologies for attendance. Robin, please could you list any apologies?
I've had apologies from John T. Archbold, Sue Simpson and Zoe Stuckey.
Thank you very much. Item 2, welcome to new members. Please can I invite the following people, I'll do them singly at a time, to introduce themselves. So Emma, our early years representative, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Don't believe Emma's on the call with us yet.
Okay. Thank you. And in which case, Louise, who's our college representative.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Louise Rowley. I'm Executive Principal at UCS College Group, representing Further Education Post 16.
That's great. Thank you, Louise, and welcome. So please can I introduce also Clive Heapy, who's the Chief Finance Officer, who will introduce himself now.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, colleagues. Clive Heaphy, Chief Finance Officer for Somerset Council, been in post for 3 months or so now, and looking forward to working with you as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. So which brings us to item 3, declarations of interest. Can I invite members, please, to declare any interests? Okay, no interests have been declared. So we will go to item 4, submitted public questions. No public questions have been received by the deadline of 5 o'clock on the 26th of September. So we will go to item 5, minutes of the previous meeting. We need to agree the minutes of the 12th of June 2025 are accurate. But before we do that, we'll just go down. I'll go down through the actions if we can confirm, please, relevant members. So the first action from the minutes was an additional change to the Constitution to be made before the 25-26 version is finalised, shared with members and published on the website. Can anybody confirm whether that action's now been completed?
That has been done and it is in the published version.
Thank you, Robin. And the next action was to review the meeting date of the 3rd of March to avoid a clash with the SEND Partnership Board.
That has now been moved so that it doesn't clash.
Great. Review the plan to ensure that any consultations, particularly around the DSG and national funding formula, are included on the plan. I believe that in a pre-meeting, we will add those to the agenda as we go. And then we're reviewing the January meeting schedule to identify an opportunity for additional meeting, discuss any national funding formula shortfalls. I guess we'll look at that at the November one, unless somebody else has got some more information. Okay, so those are the actions. If anybody has any queries about the minutes, please can you raise your hand? Susan Fielder, please.
Thank you. Susan Fielder from the Oak Partnership, representing primary academies, I think. So query relating to the question I asked about the early years, the various early years grants. So it's referenced on page 1, and my question links to the Constitution as well. So it's really where there are, dog wants to join in, where there are additional grants, so the pay and national insurance grants for early years and the expansion grant. Are those routinely discussed with the early years subgroup? Because the Constitution suggests that those come back to anything to do with that has financial implications comes to the forum. So I'm seeking to understand the process, because it's been a couple of meetings where I've asked about additional early years grant funding, and it doesn't feel like it comes to the forum. So I just wanted to be reassured that it goes to the early years group, please.
Phil Curd and then Claire Winter.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you, Susan. Just to confirm that anything that comes to Schools Forum for a decision relating to early years would have been through the Early Years Partnership for consultation beforehand.
My question is more the other way round. So where we haven't had anything to do with those grants at forum, have they been to the early years subgroup or whatever it's called?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yes, we take a lot more detail to that partnership, which used to be a subgroup, but now it's much more a consultative forum, and where we need to take a formal decision, we do so having consulted with that group.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire Winter, you had a hand up.
Yeah, I've taken it down. I was going to answer the question in the absence of anybody else, but Phil's done it much better than I would have done. Thank you.
No, not at all. Thank you, Claire. So are there any more questions about the minutes? No, in which case, please can we vote, use the hand function to agree the minutes?
I believe that's everyone has now voted, Simon.
That's great. Thank you, Robin. Okay, in which case, please lower your hands. And we will go to item 6A, the DSG outturn. This item is for information, and I would like to invite Joe Curry, the Strategic Business Partner in Education, to present.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, just move on. So, as Simon has said, this item is for information only. My name is Joe Curry. I'm the Strategic Business Partner for Education. I've got just a couple of slides just to summarise the dedicated schools grant outturn for 24-25, and a couple of slides just to update you on the forecast for the DSG as of month 4 for 25-26. So just want to move on. Thank you. So this slide just shows you the variance as of outturn for the DSG. So you can see on the table that the overspend was just over £28 million for 24-25, and that was set against the original budget of 135.5 million. So nearly a 21% overspend for last year. As I'm sure you're all aware, and you can see in the table, the main pressure is on the high needs block, which we set a budgeted deficit of nearly 18.853 million, and we overspent that by almost £9.5 million last year. And the two main overspend areas are in mainstream, and that's mainstream top-ups and costed plans, and that was nearly 7.4 million overspent, and in independent non-maintained schools, which was just over 3.4 million pounds overspent last year. So next slide, thank you. So this information on this table just gives you the categories that we allocate to the DSG high needs block budget, all the different categories and the outturns, and the biggest overspend by far was on mainstream, where we set a budget of 12.4 million and we spent 19.8 million pounds, and that was a 60% nearly overspend on the budget. And the main reason for that is to do with the average cost of the children with EHCPs that are in mainstream schools. So our budget, we set that at an average cost of £5,600, and the actual year-end average cost per child was more like £8,500. So a significant increase. And I said it's a 50% increase in the cost, and that is mainly to do with children with costed plans. I think we started the year with 650 approximately children with costed plans, and we ended the year with 980. So a significant jump in the year in the mainstream sector. And the next line, the next biggest overspend was in independent non-maintained schools. And we had an additional 38 children on average for the year going into INMS placements, and the cost of an INMS placement is, or was last year, just under £70,000 per child. So that led to a £3.4 million overspend in INMS placements. Against that, we have an underspend, quite a big underspend on the CLA line. That's children looked after. We undertook a review on a child-by-child basis of the charges to the high needs block, and we were able to reduce those, and that came as an underspend, and that brings the charges in line with the DSG regulations. So that was an underspend for those 97 children. And that was all I was going to say on that slide. Move on. This just gives you an idea of the closing deficit. So the closing deficit at 31st of March 25 is nearly £62 million. So it has almost doubled from the opening deficit on the DSG from 33.9 to 61.992 million pounds, and that is forecast to continue to grow. And that's all I'm going to say on that one. So could you move on? Just to give you a flavour of what's happening in 25-26, this table shows you, and it's a slightly different format this year. We've slightly tweaked the format to follow the corporate guidelines, and the full year projection at the moment was at month 4 a 37.179 million overspend. So that has continued to increase from the 28 million that we had last year, and that's based on a budget of a 33.9 million overspend, and that will, as I've said in the commentary above, increase the deficit forecast to nearly 100 million pounds compared to the brought forward balance of 62 million, which is a significant financial risk to the council. And I said also that that's a 60% increase on the current deficit of £62 million. So that's where we are this year. And I've just broken that down.
Yes. Can we just pause there a moment?
Yes,
Katie,
course, yes.
You've got a hand up.
Don't know if that's a legacy hand from earlier.
Maybe.
From the voting on the
in
minutes.
Which case, please, Joe, continue.
I'll carry on. This is the last slide just on the numbers. So this just gives you a summary of the high needs blocks, the same categories as we had in previous years. As you can see, for mainstream top-ups and costed plans, we increased the budget significantly from the 12 million last year to nearly 21 million for 25-26, and we're still expecting that to overspend. And that, as I'm sure a lot of you on the call are aware, we rolled forward a significant number of costed plans that were due to end in July. We rolled them forward to 25-26, and the impact of that has been higher than we expected. And I think that's largely to do with the cost of teaching assistant roles. So there's been quite a significant increase in the salaries of those teaching assistants, which has impacted the expected cost for those children that are receiving costed plans for 25-26. And then the other overspend is within independent non-maintained schools. And at the moment, or as of month 4, we were forecasting an additional 6 children above the budget, and also we're seeing some pressure on inflation. So we put the budget together with an inflationary increase of 3%, and that's looking at like closer to 4% for 25-26. So those are the main two areas where I just want to draw your attention to. So that's it on the numbers. I think I'm going to hand over to Claire to talk about the deficit management plan. It's okay.
Thanks, Jo. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Claire Winter. I'm the Executive Director for Children, Families and Education for the Council. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of Amelia Walker, who unfortunately is not very well. These slides have already been presented to the Executive and full Council in the last month or two. So if you've been watching Council meetings, you'll already have seen these slides. I only have 10 minutes and there are a lot of slides, so I'm not going to take you through every single one. I hope people have had an opportunity to read them in the main. So if we could just go to the next slide. So the deficit management plan. So the deficit management plan is a plan that we are required to have by the Council and by the Department for Education to try and reduce the deficit on the high needs block. It's very closely linked to our SEND strategy. So the SEND strategy is obviously trying to improve the outcomes for children with SEND, but it also has a dual function in terms of also looking at how we can reduce costs and reduce the deficit. That strategy has been co-produced with children, parents, carers, other people in the system. And as you can see there, it has 4 main tenets. So getting help early as possible is about trying to ensure that both early in life and early when in a sort of situation or a problem arising, we get help in there as early as we possibly can to prevent escalation of that issue. That families have the right access to the right information, they get support when they need it, and the provision that is right for their child. That professionals are working together effectively around that child in both an education sense, in social care and in health, and that we're focusing on preparing those young people for their future, not just on the here and now, but looking at what's their trajectory into adult life and making sure we try and put in the right resources between us to make sure that child has a good opportunity to get into adult life in the best possible state that they can. So if you move forward, please. So in terms of what we're trying to do in transformation to achieve some of those aims, if we start at the bottom left-hand corner, hopefully everybody's aware of the neighbourhoods and localities work, where we have 6 localities that are basically school cluster areas. We have put our education engagement service in with our prevention service and social care to work with schools and families more closely so that we can try and support children to be in school and to stay in school and to get the right resources to them early so that they don't need to either move into a more statutory setting, more statutory level in education or in social care. That's being supported by the data and digital work that's happening around Transform, which is a way of accessing or harvesting information about children and their families to identify key risk factors and therefore identify which children are likely to need the most help early on. We have some new functions in that middle block at the top, which I won't go through, which is around making sure that we have the right people to support schools and families where they need that to get the right outcomes for children. On the top right corner is the Somerset Flexible Education Model, which is being worked on at the moment to look at how we get children back into school when then they've been out of school for some time and the stages we may need to go through to enable them to do that well. And we're also working on the sufficiency of school places in Somerset for children. We know that's an issue, and I'm sure you're all aware it is as well. And we're doing a lot of work on that, including the SEND units, which I'll come on to in a minute. And supported employment, supported internships is an area of strength, I think. We do it very well in Somerset, but we need to make sure, as I said, that we're looking at these young people's future and looking at how we can support them to get into employment in adulthood. If we move to the next slide. So this is quite a scary slide, I think, in terms of the deficit forecast. This forecast goes up to 2930. Across that sort of middle line of cumulative deficit, if we take no action at all, if we don't do anything at all to try and reduce the spend on the high needs block, by 2930 that deficit is going to be nearly £300 million. That is clearly not a place we want to be, and it is not viable in terms of the finances for the council and in the DSG. What we need to do is to try and reduce that by having various work streams, which we've worked on with a consultancy company called People2 and with our own finance colleagues, to try and reduce that deficit over time. And you can see that on the bottom line, if the activity that takes place in those work streams is implemented in the way that we hope it will be, and we're planning for it to be, it will reduce that cumulative deficit, but it won't delete it. So by 29/30, if those actions are effective, the cumulative deficit will be 106 million rather than nearly 300 million pounds. Move on. So this slide sets out the funding that's required in the second half of this year to try and bring forward some of those resources to make sure that we've got the right activities or start implementing the right activities. I won't go through that in any detail. If we move to the next slide. And this slide sets out the summary of the investment that we need to make. So we need to put some investment into the system to be able to pull the savings out. So the top box effectively sets out those work streams in terms of the things that we need to do to try and reduce the pressure on the high needs block, and the reduction in spend that we expect, or the reduction in deficit we expect by 29/30 if we do that. The column that says REC is the recommendations for the People 2 report, which I think are in the appendices of the executive. We can certainly send out those recommendations if people want to have a look at them. So moving to the next slide. Again, I won't go through that in any detail. Everybody can read that for themselves. So these next few slides set out the activity effectively under each of those 4 SEND strategy themes at the beginning, in terms of the work streams that we think need to happen under each of these, alongside the recommendations from People 2 to try and reduce the pressure on the high needs block. But this will also hopefully improve outcomes for children. So I've talked already about neighbourhoods and localities. We know we need to do more in terms of quality assuring the alternative provision and independent non-maintained schools to make sure that they are delivering good quality education for our children, but also good value for money. I'm not going to go through all of these because I haven't got time, but people can read them and obviously ask questions if you want to. If you can move to the next slide, please. So this slide sets out what we're trying to do in terms of the actions that we need to take to implement those activities. So we are implementing that locality model, as I've already described, and we're looking to expand the capacity of the inclusion advice line so that schools have the ability to contact somebody and get a quick answer in relation to how they could be better supported. And that is some of the investment that's being made in the second half of 25/26 to be able to deliver that. We are also, I'm sure you're aware, looking to review PRUs. There's a consultation that's just closed on PRUs, so people can understand what our activity, what we would like to do with that, and how that might shape in the future. And we're also looking at costing a digital system so that we can streamline some of that financial decision making, so that staff have a greater ability to be more efficient than they are currently, so that we can actually see pupil level costs and workflows, which are difficult to see at the moment. Sorry, moving on. So the localities we've already talked about. Move to the next slide. So getting help early is another of those work streams. This is about, as I said, either early in life or early in a problem, trying to improve the help that families can get. You can see there that we want to improve the availability of support around children's speech, language and communication, because we know that that is a key area where children really struggle and can drive them into a statutory SEND sort of world. We need to work with families to understand their experience and understand how best to use language and improve those experience of families who are raising concerns, and also in relation to the complaints that people make. And we need to be able to improve our assessment and identification processes using information sharing, as I've described earlier, like Transform, and also increase our capacity to work with early years so that we actually get access to these children earlier in life so that we can try and help resolve those problems earlier for them. And we also need to look at how we improve the availability of activities outside school so that we actually improve access for children with SEND and provide that enrichment and wraparound support that they wouldn't otherwise necessarily get. Next slide. Again, these are the actions that we need to take, we think, to try and make those things happen. And then access to the right support and provision. Again, you can see here in the projects going down the left-hand side, we need to redesign the approach to preventing exclusion, and through pupil referral units, make sure that we've got support for excluded pupils that's more effective, efficient, and supports them to return to mainstream school. We need to expand our specialist options for sufficiency of school places. As I already described, SEND units as a key part of that. We need to support a better offer for mainstream schools in terms of inclusive curriculum, and making sure that we're supporting teaching and classroom practice so children can be more included. And we also are very aware of the need to streamline and improve the timeliness of delivery of education healthcare plans. We move forward. Again, that just sets out the key actions that we're intending to take. SEND units, I think I've talked about those enough. I'm sure you know what they are, but obviously I'm happy to take questions. Flexible education, again, hopefully you're aware of what those are. It's described there perfectly well. There's nothing I can add to that that's going to help you, I think. And moving forward, I think that's it for that presentation. So I'm happy to take questions briefly. I know we're on a tight time scale, but if anybody's got any questions for me or for Joe on the deficit management plan, we're happy to take them. Thank you.
Susan Fieldman, please.
Thank you. It's obviously a huge piece of work and a really detailed plan, and a really challenging set of circumstances. I wonder if I may just drill into the detail of the finances, given that this is the schools forum, and particularly leading into the next item in relation to the transfer. When I looked at the financial model for the deficit management plan, it appeared that the schools block transfer was increasing year on year and was not fixed at the 0.5%. And I wonder if we could just clarify that isn't the proposal. And also just a second part of the question, I was interested to understand whether the overall financial modelling had made any assumptions around inflationary increases in top-up rates, both for mainstream schools and specialist and alternative provision, or whether that was a level of detail that still needed to be ironed out.
I'll pass that to Joe.
I can answer that. I can answer those. So yeah, Susan, thanks for your question. You're correct in that the schools forum transfer has been included as part of the cumulative savings instead of being accounted for as part of the sort of income, the annual income. And subsequent to producing those papers, we have picked up that it has been treated as a sort of cumulative increasing amount, which isn't correct. So it is 0.5%. That is the current proposal and the duration of the deficit management plan. So yes, that will be corrected in a future iteration of the plan. And then onto the model itself, I think we did discuss whether to bring in inflation in our cost base, but I think we had a lot of different variables going in. So I think the decision was made to keep that out of the version that went to executive and full council. We are working on an updated model, and we will continuously, will evolve, because we have agreed to report every quarter on the DMP, and there will be further iterations which also will be updated for forecasts. So I think that the inclusion of inflation on the cost base is an extra, I think, 50 million approximately to the end of the plan. So it does take that deficit that Claire mentioned of nearly 300 million up to about 350 million. But yeah, inflation, I think, should be included, and we basically will be producing another model at some point to include that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Ruth Hobbs, please.
Hi, Ruth Hobbs from Somerset Parent Care Forum. Just an observation, really. So Joe covered off very well in her narrative around the difference between the funding for mainstream schools and our independent non-maintained. I think it's just helpful to put that into the document, because not everybody would understand that we're talking about 5,000 per pupil in a mainstream compared to the significant difference in an independent non-maintained. So actually it is more cost viable to keep children in our normal schools,
Yeah,
and to
yeah.
top that budget up rather than to put them into a £70,000 independent non-maintained. And I'm going to stop now because I might start on about independent non-maintained.
Yep.
Louise.
Thanks, Louise Rowley, USG College Group. Just from a post-16 perspective, I noted that the budget for this year is predicted to be the same. Yet I think post-16 we're seeing an increase in those high need students within colleges. And then just rolling that forward in terms of sufficiency and places, has that been built into the model?
That's a good question. I'll probably have to take that away. I know that historically we struggled to get the data in a sort of timely fashion for FE pupils, and I know that specifically last year we did have a delay in that, so that might have fed through to the model and meant that we've not included a sufficient increase in the numbers, in the sort of base number of pupils. I'm not sure this is, I think I'll have to take that away. I'll have to come back to you on that one.
And certainly on Joe, on that point, if there is an issue in terms of working post-16 in that information exchange, I'd be willing to sit down and have a conversation about how that might be improved. Because certainly for a post-16 college, in terms of planning their budget, that's going to be quite important.
Yep. Okay. Let me just write that down. I'll take that away. I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
Right, I put my hand up for my own question, so I'll just lower that moment. Sorry if this is in the plan, but the SEND units that are part of the cost reduction strategy and better provision, at the moment, as I understand it, those are at primary level. Is it built into the plan a secondary build that follows on? Is that capital expenditure in there? Otherwise, I foresee children, given this is a long-term plan, children coming out of primary, they've had this provision, suddenly going to secondary, where we already know it's a difficult transition from a primary situation with one classroom possibly to multiple classrooms, multiple teachers moving around sites. Is that in the plan, or are we risking a cliff edge where we suddenly see children, us needing more costed plans back out to INMS because we're now emerging from those primary SEND units into secondary?
I think Phil's probably best placed to answer that.
It is indeed. Thank you, Claire. So the first tranche of units has primarily been primary units, Simon, but one of the 6 that opened at the start of September was at Wadham Secondary School in Crewkerne. And we have had a tripartite proposal from the secondary schools in Yeovil. What we are conscious, though, that the bulk of our provision is in primary at the moment. And one of the reasons for that is that our focus is repurposing surplus accommodation in our schools. Now, if we think back to our peak birth rates, they are between 2010 and 2015. So the bulk of our children are currently somewhere between 10 and 15 years old, which means they are predominantly sat in our secondary schools, which means we don't have much latent physical capacity in those settings currently. But in the next few years, we can see that roles are dropping in some places, and then we will move in behind those children and create SEN units for secondary age pupils around the county as often as we can. I think we also recognise that we won't be able to have as many SEN units at secondary as we do at primary, and we will have to probably look across the system, including our special schools, and look at whether we can make them more secondary focused and contain more of the primary age need in local primary schools using SEN units.
Yeah, thank you. And I probably should declare an interest because clearly one of those secondary schools is Westfield, where I am. So there is absolutely an interest there. The only risk of that model is you're being led by where the demographic is low, and the need might be where the demographic is high because you're looking for empty building space. Is that something you considered?
It is, and within the key decision that's going to our executive tomorrow, which unlocks a 3-year £20 million capital programme, you will see, and I'll put some things in the chat in a moment, but we have budgets for SEN units that have come about by refurbishing accommodation. We also have a budget and place target for new build SEN units. So where we need to create a full primary or secondary pathway, we do have the ability of delivering a new build model, but the best value for money is clearly in refurbishing surplus accommodation.
No, thank you, Phil. Are there any other questions, or we will move on to the next item? No, in which case we will go to item 7, the 0.5% transfer from schools block to high needs block. This item is for information, and I would invite Jo Curry to speak.
Thank you, Simon. So as Simon has said, this item is for information pending a full consultation of all schools in Somerset, which we need to do prior to a vote. So I'll run through the background and some of the key points from the paper, and then sort of the next steps on it. So I've just reproduced on here the key points from the paper, which I just want to run through with you just for the background of why we've put forward this transfer this year. So we just need you to recognise, we ask you to recognise the significant financial risk to the local authority as a result of the DSG deficit, which is forecast to be around £100 million at 31st of March 2026, and as a result of that, the local authority needs to take all available steps and look at all possible mitigations in order to reduce and manage that significant financial risk. We're asking at this stage for you to review the proposals and provide some indicative views on this transfer for 2026-27 prior to a wider consultation, and that will be launched as soon as possible after this meeting. We will need, unfortunately, to hold another meeting prior to the 17th of December. And that's because if Schools Forum are unable to support the proposal, then our intention is to put a disapplication request in, which we need to get in prior to the 17th of November to be considered by the DFE before the APT is submitted. And that's basically what we'll have to do if Schools Forum vote no. So next slide, please. So this, just to note that the 0.5% transfer is permitted under the current regulations and subject to your Schools Forum approval. We're not aware at the moment that's going to change, but we're expecting this government white paper, which may change the course of what the DFE, well, how the DFE are currently operating, and if there's anything that substantially changes the position on the 0.5% transfer, we'll need to come back to Schools Forum with different proposals. And as we've already mentioned, the transfer is part of our deficit management plan, which has been approved. It went to executive on the 6th of August, and full council signed it off last week. And the transfer is going to be used to support our strategy delivering the DMP and helping to mitigate that deficit, which is financially unsustainable for the council, forecast at over 300 million probably by March 2030. And the modelling we've put together and the modelling that I've shared with you in the paper has been based on the 25-26 APT. Currently, obviously, we don't have any information yet about 26-27. So once that comes, the figures and the sort of outcomes for individual schools will change. So that's that slide. So the funding transfer is estimated at just over £2 million, and it's 2.091 million for 25-26. And this table just shows you how, based on the final APT for 25-26, it shows you how that would impact the schools that we have. So there were 254 schools in the APT for 25-26, and actually based on that, the APT for last year, only 144 schools would contribute to this 0.5% transfer. And that's largely because of the minimum funding guarantees that were included in the 25-26 APT. So you can see there that the average reduction for primary, middle and secondary of, I think, 6k, 24k and 58k is on average a higher percentage than the 0.5. And that's because 110 schools are not impacted based on the 25-26 APT. What we're proposing to share in the consultation is a model with an MFG set at minus 0.5%, which I hopefully recall was a possibility for the 25-26 schools block. I think we need to demonstrate how that might impact, because that is another option, and that will mean that more schools will then contribute, and the nearly 1% reduction at secondary level will hopefully come down slightly, as there will be less schools or more schools contributing to the £2 million. So that's that slide. So I need to just set out as well how the block transfer will be used, so that the bulk of the money will be used to contribute towards our setup and revenue costs for the SEN units, which Phil's just talked to you about. And there I've just put some commentary which comes from the paper about how our SEN units align to our local approach, and obviously they allow children with EHCPs to stay within a mainstream school and maintain that contact with their peer group, and reduce our costs of diverting them into independent settings. And the schools that are hosting those SEN units have got that package of support and training, which is delivered by a combination of the local authority, the SENSE, which is Somerset Special Schools, and the Parent Carer Forum. And just to confirm, as of September 25, and this might have moved on, but we have 6 units open, majority in primary, and as Phil said, 1 in secondary. And at the time I put this slide together, there were 12 children placed into those settings. That one, and then the balance of the funding, so 0.429 million of funding will then be used to support our work around demand management, and that's a combination of investing in outreach, investing in our access caseworkers, and some money for the SEN inclusion advice line that Claire mentioned earlier. And that's really about making sure that children can access that, sector workers can access that support at an earlier stage, and just to try and stop children sort of advancing into that, needing that EHCP, and to provide local support. Yeah, I think that's it. So this is the next steps. This is the timeline that I'm currently proposing for this 0.5% transfer. We do need to do an all schools consultation. So after this meeting, put together a pack of information, and I'm hoping to get that out by Monday the 6th of October. And then I'm going to close that at just before half term on the 24th of October. We'll collate the feedback and circulate it after half term, and we are proposing to have a meeting about this is a sole topic on Monday the 10th of November, with the disapplication deadline on the 17th. So that is the current timescale. So happy to take questions, comments.
Okay, in the absence, no, Susan Fielding. Otherwise I was going to ask a question, but I will go after Susan.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, it links back to my earlier question in a sense. I can see all the logic for all of this, Joe, and the process that you put together is really clear. The question for me is around comes back to assumptions around how top-up rates for mainstream schools and special schools and AP settings will change and keep pace with inflation, and so protect their real terms value, because if that isn't transparent in the overall decision-making process, then it's a hidden cut in the system that affects schools disproportionately. And I just wonder whether there is a way in which we can bring that some clarity around that into the consultation and decision making process, because otherwise you're just looking at the sort of raw impact on the overall funding formula and not considering the overall piece.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I will take that away. We are obviously in a position where we are looking at a significant in-year overspend, and every decision we make, we have to look at that. And the aim of the deficit management plan is initially to bring that in-year overspend back to balance. So every decision that increases a cost has to be weighed up carefully, I think. But let me take that away.
Yeah, so my question came down to, partly it was just unpicking one of the points, was if we don't adjust the minimum funding guarantee, the reason those schools are on that is because they have low levels of deprivation, low levels of the students with characteristics. Effectively, they can't have money taken away because they're already at the minimum. But essentially, we will be putting the cut onto schools who have high levels of pupil premium, EAL, whatever the characteristics are in that formula. That is the effect if we don't move that minimum funding guarantee, as I understand it. And the second point is these two pots are not unlinked. And I'm aware, looking at my own school, and I'm sure others are representative, effectively, we had another unfunded pay rise this year. So we are looking at a significantly more difficult budget than in previous years. And if we take more money out of the mainstream school, there is a risk that actually what we do is we push more children and parents to make decisions around need into a more expensive, significantly more expensive system outside of mainstream. And actually, for the 0.5% that transferred, it will end up costing you more than 0.5% in the impact. And I know there's a lot of unknowns there, but I think it's worth noting that these are not two unlinked things. And it could look like money coming from one to reduce the other, but in fact, the other ends up even more expensive because of it. I think that's worth looking at that risk. It's impossible to quantify that risk, but it feels very real from a school perspective, in that, in essence, if you take that money, it might be one less TA, one less teacher, less support, one less pastoral member of staff, which pushes more children into a more difficult situation.
Yeah, I think I hear you. We hear you definitely, and I certainly see a lot of schools under pressure on their budgets. A lot more schools reporting potential deficits, in-year deficits, and this I appreciate that this does put more pressure on the school system. I think as the local authority, we just have to look. We have to look at every available option open to us. A lot of local authorities that are within the old safety valve scheme that the DfE had in place for several years running, that those local authorities to do a 0.5% transfer, well, as a matter of course, and we didn't get into that scheme in Somerset, but we must have been pretty close, because our deficit is now one of the biggest, I think, in the country. One of the highest in-year deficits in the country. So, yeah, we do need to unfortunately look at every option open to us in terms of trying to mitigate that deficit. But yeah, I certainly understand where you're coming from, Simon.
Susan, you had your hand up momentarily. Was there another question?
I was just worried that we were conflating the minimum funding guarantee and the minimum per pupil funding levels.
Yes. That's minimum funding guarantee. Yeah. So I'll produce with the team various different options for you to have a look at with this 0.5% transfer, and I know what you mean. The minimum per pupil funding does still have to be maintained, so there will still be schools protected even if we do set the minimum funding guarantee at minus 0.5%.
That's a very good point, Susan, and I think it's very well made. It is a complex piece of work,
really complex,
and with a very tight timeline for a decision.
Yes, appreciate that.
Are there any other questions or points? In which case, we'll go to item 8, interest distribution for schools interest 24-25. This item is for decision and information, and Jo Curry.
Yep. Okay, so thank you, Simon. As you said, this is a decision for local authority maintained school representatives only. And this is the interest distribution for interest. It actually relates to 3 years. So it's 2022-23, 23-24 and 24-25. So it's 3 years of interest to be handed out. So this item is for decision, and we have got a couple of options which I've asked you to vote on. those that are able to vote. So our published financial management scheme states that schools are paid on surplus balances and we charge interest on deficit balances, and that's a calculation that's set out in the FMS unless there is an agreed recovery plan in place. We haven't distributed any interest to schools, to LA maintained schools, since 22-23. And there's a number of reasons behind that. We just to summarise them, we went to a financial emergency in November 23. That's taken a huge amount of our sort of internal resource. We had a big council restructure, as I'm sure you're aware. That came in April 2025, and I think about 400-500 people lost their jobs. And then we've had quite a few changes in personnel at the council, which has just meant that we haven't been able to get to this decision or internal agreement on how we should distribute this interest until this point. So I apologise for the delay in that. So we do have just over £1.5 million to be distributed for the 3 financial years to 24-25, and a decision does need to be taken on the method of distributing that money today, please. Next slide. So just the background to the reason for the different options. The local authority hasn't formally requested every single year those deficit recovery plans, and nor have we been able to sort of formally sign off deficit recovery plans. And obviously there's been a significant delay in distributing that interest. And as the local authority, we recognise that it may now be unfair to retrospectively charge those local authority maintained schools a deficit interest charge, and also deficit charges do further add to those balances, those deficit balances, and make that more difficult to recover. So we've come up with 2 different options to be considered and voted on by Schools Forum members that are eligible to distribute our interest to 24-25. So these are the 2 options that we'd like you to vote on, please. So option 1 is to strictly apply the provisions of the FMS and pay interest to schools with surpluses and charge those schools with deficits for the 3 years for 24-25. And option 2 that we've come up with is that we have come up with a sort of funded solution where the schools with surpluses that have accrued interest will receive a slightly lower interest rate as set out in the report, and therefore we would not charge those schools in deficit for those 3 years. And I think I've just got one more slide that just shows you a summary of how that affects the schools. So this table just gives you the amounts to be distributed by each year. So we have 294,000 for 22-23, 539 for 23-24, and 713,000 for 24-25. And the next column just explains how many schools wouldn't receive or actually have got a deficit charge. So it's 6, 5 and 8 in each year that would receive a charge on their deficit balances. And then the next column tells you how many schools we're due to pay under option 2. The columns for the interest rate show the interest rate that's due to be payable under the FMS, and then that shows you the reduction. So each year we've got 0.09% reduction in 22-23, 0.3 in 23-24, and then about 0.4 in 24-25. And then on the far right, that on average is the amount that schools in surplus would have to sacrifice in terms of their interest in order to cover the deficit, those schools charged that are in deficit for those 3 years. So it's £1,205 that would need to be sacrificed to cover those deficit charges for those 3 years. That is it. So I don't know if you want to go back to the options slide, Simon, yeah, I think it's.
So
Robin.
If we take questions first, and then we will need to do a vote, which we'll do afterwards. Are there any questions about this? It is only LA maintained members who can vote. Susan Pilden.
Can I ask, apologies, it may be in the paper, I read it again, can't see it. What happens to a school that has turned into an academy in the meantime?
Yep. So those will still be due. Those balances will still be due, and we will need to pay those across.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
it's a sort of
Yeah.
an interesting
Yes,
issue in that
it is.
if it's only local authority maintained schools that get to vote on this, but it's potentially got some implications
There are
for
a few.
academies.
Yes, there are a few
Okay.
academised schools that have been affected. Yes.
Okay, given that we don't have any more questions, we will do, I guess it's a preference for option 1, a preference for option 2, and people who are not voting. So let's go with abstaining. So
it's only maintained schools that can vote, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maintain members, please can you vote if you prefer option 1? Okay. Can you vote if you prefer option 2? Thank you. And those people who abstain. Okay, Robin, did you manage to capture that?
That was a unanimous vote for option 2 by our LA maintained reps.
Thank you very much, Robin. Okay, in which case we will now go to item 9, de-delegated contingency, and this item is for information. Jo Curry again.
Okay, me again. So yeah, this item again is for information, and this only impacts the current local authority maintained mainstream schools. So it doesn't affect our specials and proves because they're funded through the high needs block. So this is just for the mainstream primaries, and we have one. Well, I think we have one single secondary school. We do have a few middle schools as well. And this is for information again. So this is for information ahead of a decision at the next meeting at the end of November, and just to make you aware of our proposals and different options and some of the criteria that we set out. We can have, happy to receive views at this point and use that to shape our final sort of proposal. So we're seeking Schools Forum's agreement to set up a de-delegated contingency to fund schools in financial difficulty, and a number of other local authorities do have such a fund, and we're specifically trying to set up a fund to support some schools that may have deficits or may need some funding for specific situations. So at this stage, just requesting comments on the proposals. Again, we'll need to launch a consultation for LA maintained schools, and also any comments on the criteria that are proposed within the paper. And just to remind everybody that the local authority cannot write off the deficit balance of any school, and that this de-delegated contingency is the most straightforward way that we can provide some support towards local authority schools from a central pot, which has been set up specifically for that purpose. Okay, so the background to this is that as of March 2025, we had 16 schools that were in an overall deficit position, and that total deficit was £2.391 million. And we are seeing, as I mentioned, a significant number of schools coming in with in-year deficit budgets, and based on those, we're expecting that budgeting that a further 14 schools are going to go into deficit. So we will have 30 schools, which is almost 1 in 3 maintained mainstream schools going into deficit this year, and a forecast total deficit of 3.197 million by March 2026. And then based on the budgets, we anticipate that schools may go into overall deficit by 31st of March 2027 or soon after that. And that doesn't mean that every school will be in deficit, but on average in total we'll have an overall deficit for all Somerset schools, and that's obviously financially unsustainable for us as a local authority. And we and the team and the school improvement team in the service are working with affected schools to try and support them to implement effective deficit recovery plans, and that includes face-to-face meetings and where we need to escalate things, support from the Section 151, and that's what we're working on at the moment. So I put together I've costed up 4 options so far for this de-delegated proposed contingency. And de-delegation is based on an amount per pupil in the school. So we've costed up options between £5 and £30 per child in primary, and for the single secondary school between just over £7 and £43.48. And that gives us a range of options from a £78,000, obviously quite a small pot, to a more significant £468,000. And I have said in the paper that one option could be to set up a more significant contingency initially, and then a potentially a smaller ongoing one. We need to come back every year to Schools Forum to vote for this de-delegated contingency. Do you want me to pause there, Simon? Because I know Naomi's put her hand up.
Yeah, please. Thank you for spotting that. Naomi.
Hi, Joe. Sorry to interrupt your flow there. I just had a couple of questions, really, and they're probably more linked to the previous slide. Just about, that notion of like the presentation around Somerset schools and what's happening for Somerset schools and that prediction for them, and managing challenging budgets myself, and you and I will catch up about those at some point. I wondered about the clear link with Somerset in terms of our higher needs. We've just talked about the potential need to transfer funds from schools budget into higher needs. And actually, we know that there's an issue there. So when we look at what's happening for our schools in Somerset, because we can say, right, we need to do something to help these schools, but actually the problem is a lot more complex and deeper than that in terms of resolving a budget. It's not because they've suddenly bought and paid for X amount of equipment, or because they're paying for extra staff or whatever. We know that this problem is much more complex than that. And I wonder about the comparison in terms of, is this about we are mismanaging something here in Somerset and getting something very wrong? And I looked myself as a Somerset leader in that. Have we done those comparisons with other LAs? I'm sure you have, in terms of what's happening, what's working, where is it working? Is it linked back to the minimum funding guarantee and all of those things that are slightly nuanced for Somerset? What is it that's really going on for these maintained schools that means that the prediction is that we'll all be in deficit, and that it's getting worse and not better? And we can see that with those, this many schools in deficit, then this many, then this many. And you're firefighting and desperately trying to make this work, and I know that, and I know the difficulties that the LA has had, and the staff losses, and the desperate situation we find ourselves in. But where is it actually working? Is it working anywhere? I guess is the question. It's probably a big question.
A lot of questions. Yes, a lot of questions. I'm not sure I can answer all those questions in one go. I mean, certainly in Somerset, we follow the national funding formula for schools, and we are only able to give out on the schools block what we receive from the DFE. So that is based on the national funding formula. So there's no there's nothing we can do. Very little we can do to flex on the schools block. On the situation with schools around the country, I think it is a national problem. There is a problem, and that is as a result of very, very small increases, inflationary increases that the DFE have given in the schools block over the last few years, and they do give quite good headline figures, but when you look at the actual impact at a local level, it's very small increases. We've got an issue in Somerset where the last at least 2 years we've had a gap on our funding, largely because deprivation has got worse in Somerset. The number of children with English as additional language has increased in Somerset. And so the factors that are squeezing our budgets do come through. You can see those in the schools block, and you can see them worsening each year. All schools are reporting to us issues with SEND. And this issue around having to use your notional budget for SEND children, for SEND support, puts a lot of pressure in schools and obviously we've got a significant pressure on the high needs block with its sort of £37 million predicted overspend. I think we've got falling rolls as well. that puts pressure on schools, and we've got a number of things that need to be looked at in Somerset, particularly around some of our perhaps our more rural schools, and perhaps around our system and strategy. And that's not for me to make decisions on. I sort of rely on the service to look at that in more detail and decide what the best strategy is for Somerset in terms of the school structure and the school system. So there's all sorts of things going on, but I do think it is a national problem that it's very difficult to solve. I think our view on, in particular, school budgets is that our take on it is that schools need to operate within their financial envelope, just like Somerset Council has to. There's a huge amount of pressure in the council. You probably know we've got a significant budget gap, and we are working hard internally to try and close that gap. And the same sort of expectation, I suppose, is placed on the schools. We request that that everything is delivered, but within the financial envelope that we are able to sort of give you. So I think that's our position. Unless anybody else wants to comment, like I know Claire's on the call. Clive, don't know if anybody else wants to say anything. Yeah, it's a whole load of things going on.
Yeah, there was a lot, and it was a big question, and I really appreciate your answer on it. I think the other thing to just recognise when there's any debt, you're trying to, it's accruing money each time, but also it's in order to pay that back, you're going to have to take money from the kids that are currently in the system in order to try and pay back the debt that you've accrued. So that becomes even more difficult for those schools. In that situation, but also for us as an LA, and I think it's just important that we have these conversations, isn't it? There aren't always, and there certainly aren't for this particular thing, easy answers, are there?
Yeah,
but thank you, Joe.
There's certainly a lot of lobbying going on. We're part of the F40 group, which is a group that is lobbying government for fairer high needs funding across the UK, because there is certainly higher funding per child in places like a lot of the London boroughs get a much higher funding rates than we do, and we're a very rural county, so we do definitely suffer from that, as well as our small schools, that sort of thing. So yeah, feel free to lobby.
Yeah, well, I wonder, Joe, that was my thought actually when I first started asking the question, was about that very need to, we talk about various different things. You talk about the Ofsted new framework and various things in schools, and all of that becomes irrelevant if you can't afford to pay the people to be there to look after the kids and make sure they're safe first and foremost. So, that lobbying side of things, whatever support you need, whatever we can give you as a forum, as heads, I think just let us know, and also maybe let us know what you are doing to try and lobby it so that we can get behind you. We're shoulder to shoulder with you on it. I'll stop talking now, let somebody else talk. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Clive.
And thank you. Yeah, just to come in behind Joe on that, there is no easy answer here. As Naomi said, there's complicated things that are at play, and we need to make sure that we try and manage as best we can to support you as a local authority. There is a national fair funding discussion going on at local authority level about how resources are allocated, which is better now reflecting deprivation needs, where Somerset's levels of deprivation are such that we will score better on that. But equally, it's offset by Somerset's ability to be able to raise council tax, where we'll score worse because we're seen as a largely better off area. Overall, we'll be net better off. I'm hoping that kind of approach then can be brought into national funding formulas for education, etc. So we'll continue to lobby either directly or through the local government for various forums for that position where we get more funding into the system. But I'm afraid in the short term, Joe's absolutely right. There's nothing we can do other than to work hard to manage our budgets and spend according to the income we're getting whilst we're having that long-term discussion. So apologies that there isn't an easy answer here, but I think this is a reasonable proposal for you to consider.
Okay. Any other questions or points? No. In which case we will move on. Also, please go ahead.
I think it's just a couple more slides on this contingency. So I have also shared with you a comparison of the proposed deductions for the dedelegation to the interest that we've been able to give out. So we've got a remaining approximately 92 mainstream schools, and they'll receive interest of just under £1 million. So I've just put together a little table just to show you how that deduction works for each of the sort of levels of contingency that are proposed. So the average interest received for each of those 92-ish schools is just under £11,000, and the deduction was going from 886 to about £5,300 for the biggest proposed contingency. And then I have just explained below how many schools will be affected if we deduct money based on the interest received. So at the sort of smallest level, there's only one school where the interest is cancelled, removed by the cost of the dedelegated contingency. And then there are 6 schools receiving no interest or having to contribute after they receive their interest. And just to note, those 6 schools will primarily be those schools with a deficit position, and potentially may benefit from setting up this dedelegated contingency if they meet those criteria. And so that table just shows you that there's obviously, as you take more money out with a dedelegated contingency, more schools impacted, and compared to the sort of the interest we're handing out. So at the extreme end, if we take £468,000 as a dedelegated contingency, then there are 19 schools that don't then receive any interest, and another 24 having to contribute after interest received. So I will, when we send out the consultation, I will make some of these things hopefully a bit clearer so that you can understand how this might impact individual schools. So I'll share that further. We have set out in our paper some proposed criteria for the allocation of the fund. Obviously, one of the critical things about setting up a fund like this is that we need to make sure that every school is treated fairly, and we will need to review the governance as part of that, and how we're going to arrange the distribution of any fund. So some of the criteria that we've proposed, things like a significant short-term staffing issue, a falling role situation because of demographic changes, and the local authority still requires the school to remain open, a support where we've got serious educational difficulties or not meeting targets, or Ofsted requires significant improvements, and therefore we expect the school to spend more money to return that to an improved position, or the school being part of a local reorganisation or restructure, and potentially could be financially unsustainable in its current location or size of school. So those criteria will be included in the consultation, and any other suggestions or comments you have on those, that'd be gratefully received. And also around the governance and how we manage that. So another consultation. This one I've got a bit longer on, so I'm hoping to get that one out by the 10th of October. That one will, I think, remain open until after half term. We have a bit longer to pull this one together, and then we'll review and provide the feedback by the 12th, and the vote hopefully at the next meeting, the face-to-face meeting on the 25th of November. One thing we realised is that we need to provide some clarity on is that we've only got one local authority maintained secondary school for next year, for 26-27. We have actually got 2, but one of them is about to academise. So we just need to provide some clarity on the process around that single LA maintained secondary school, which we'll do prior to the meeting on the 25th of November. So that is that on that one.
Thank you, Jo.
Anything else?
Susan Fielden.
I was just wondering whether there might be some useful learning from the mechanism that the DFE use with the safety valve programme, where they would work with the local authority in a deficit position to agree an action plan, and on the back of that there is some transfer of funding. So whether you could set out something for a school in deficit that makes it clear that there's a process to work through with the agreement of a recovery plan, and as a result of that there is some contribution. I'm imagining that's the sort of thing you're thinking about anyway. Yeah. But I sort of haven't seen in the papers, and you presumably put that in the consultation, but is the sort of process you would go through, because memory over all of those years back, the thing that would stop schools agreeing to this is any suggestion that poor financial management is being rewarded. And so I think you'd want to be protecting the totality of schools from that position. And I just wonder, just curious as the extent to which you use integrated curriculum and financial planning as part of the development of the deficit plans.
Happy to have a conversation with you, Susan, if you've got some thoughts that might be useful to sort of shape this proposal. It is something we have considered, that we don't want to create a scheme which incentivizes that sort of behaviour, and we will try and work that through as part of the process to allocate any fund that we set up. I think one of the criteria would be that the school would have to have a recovery plan in place, and would have to be following or demonstrating that it's following that deficit recovery plan, just like, as I think you've mentioned, the safety valve programme requires local authorities to meet certain targets in order for it to receive more funding from the DfE. So okay, I've written that down. If I might pick your brains, Susan, if that's okay.
Perfectly okay.
Yeah. You got anything else? No, happy to talk to you about it.
Okay, in which case we'll go to the next item. Item 10, scheme for financing schools, consultation and key changes. This item is for information.
Yeah, it's me again. So happily I've managed to get the scheme for financing schools consultation out. That went out, I think, on Friday. Robin circulated the new scheme, and this is just to remind everybody that is there. Again, it's just for local authority maintained schools, all local authority maintained schools this time, so that would include specials, PRUs and PRUs as well. And so I just got a few slides just to remind everybody that the consultation's been launched. This is the proposed timescale. So it's gone out, and hopefully closing that and half term. So anybody who wants to read it and make comments, there's some questions in there as well. So has 4 weeks to do so. We then have a bit of time, hopefully 2 weeks or so. That's 3 weeks to review the responses and make any changes to the scheme. I'm hoping to publish the final scheme in advance of the next meeting on the 25th of November. It is subject to Schools Forum voting to approve the new scheme. So hopefully that vote will take place at that meeting on the 25th, and then the new scheme would be effective, I think, from I'll have to check. I'll have to come back to you on the exact date, because there's a few points in there around interest that need to be approved. There's a question about interest. So do you want to move on? Sorry. So the scheme is a full rewrite. I don't know if anybody's had a chance to look at it yet, but it's a full rewrite, and we shared 2 copies. So there's a clean copy and a copy that shows you all the marking up. So pretty much everything has been rewritten, which is why it's taken sort of 9 months or so 9 months to a year to get to this point. And there's a few things just to draw your attention to that are part of the consultation. There is now a local bank account option within the new scheme. So that is a requirement of the DfE. So that will form part of the scheme. There are some criteria around schools obviously not being in deficit to be able to have a local bank account. Naomi, do you want to come in? Stop there.
No, don't stop there.
Okay.
So I'll carry on, and
it's quite
come
short.
back to me.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So there is also a proposed change for local authority schools on interest paid on surplus balances and to be charged on deficit balances. I've got a separate slide on that. There is some more clarity around, or we've sort of rewritten the sections to do with schools predicting deficits and deficit recovery plans, and our setting out our sort of expectations around producing a robust deficit recovery plan. That section's been rewritten quite extensively. And then there has been some significant rewrites on the charging of school budget shares that brings it into line with what the DfE guidance says, and similarly the responsibilities for redundancy and early retirement costs. Those sections have been fully rewritten. The scheme basically now reflects just those financial responsibilities. So I think there were some sections in there on things like energy and health and safety, those have been removed, and the scheme now just fully focuses on the sort of financial responsibilities and the relationship between the schools and the local authority. So there's a specific set of questions around interest again, and there are some options in respect of 25-26 and for 26-27 onwards, and I think we've posed the same question for both years. So we've asked for consultation on 3 different options for the current year and for future years and for the policy. So option 1 again is to continue with the current policy, which will mean that we pay interest on surplus balances and we charge on deficit balances. Option 2 is ceasing the payment of interest on surplus and any charges on interest, and option 3 is to adopt that sort of funded solution that we have put forward for 24-25, up to 24-25, which is to meet the cost of charging on interest balances using a reduced interest rate payable on surplus balances. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense to everybody, but happy to take any questions. Naomi, I think you've got a question.
Hi, Joe. My question wasn't really about this particular bit. It was more about the point that Susan made before about the safety valve, and just a question for us, because I just then had to go and Google it, which I do a lot when Susan talks about various different things.
Yes, yes.
And then you're so well informed, Susan. And then I was it led me to a question of why aren't we as a council looking at that?
Yeah, so safety valve was actually cancelled by the Labour government. So that existed under the previous Conservative administration, but they ended that in probably about 12 months ago. Yeah, so that's
my short Googling said it was going on to 2028, but I'm not the expert. Susan will know.
There are a number of local authorities in it. There are still quite a few local authorities that still have to operate under the safety valve, but they won't be putting any new local authorities into their safety valve. I think they've diverted their attention towards the SEND consultation and that piece of work.
So we weren't bad enough, quick enough.
We weren't potentially. I think it's quite I don't know if it's a double-edged sword or something like that, but it's not without its controversies, put it that way. Okay.
I'll always be the one to ask the daft question. Thank
you.
No,
it's not a daft question. Not at all.
So we have Claire Winter and then Ruth Hobbs.
Yeah, I was just going to explain a bit of the context of it. So when the government set up Safety Valve, they set up 2 schemes, one called Safety Valve and one called Delivering Better Value, in relation to deficit management of the high needs block. So there were criteria for both of those. The Safety Valve, you had to have a deficit of a particular proportion of your overall budget, and we didn't meet that criteria at the time, so we were not allowed to access the Safety Valve. We did ask if we could join on the basis that we could see that our deficit was going to increase quite rapidly, and we were told no. We then sort of went to the second league, if you like, to the deficit, the Delivering Better Value. Delivering Better Value did not provide any high levels of funding, so I think it gave us £1 million. Yes. And it was based on some analysis of our situation by a consultancy who made some recommendations. We put those recommendations in place using that £1 million, and it had virtually zero impact on the deficit at the time and in terms of the trajectory of the increase of the deficit. There was then a review of Delivering Better Value authorities, and I can't remember who did that. Was it Deloitte or somebody? I can't remember.
It's all published,
which basically said there had been no discernible impact of the Delivering Better Value programme. And as Joe says, the Safety Valve programme looks great because actually you do get a large wad of cash from the government, but there are really quite stringent criteria. A lot of authorities that are in Safety Valve are now really struggling because they're not able to meet those criteria. The programme does continue, I think, as you say, Nate, to 2028, but it's only for those authorities who are already in the programme to continue the activity that they've been mandated, or the actions they've been mandated to achieve during the Safety Valve programme.
Thank you, Claire. Really appreciate that.
Ruth Hobbs.
Yeah, just to add to that, multiple local authorities are trying to get out of their safety valve programme currently, but aren't able to do so. And there have been some legal challenges around the implications of the safety valve situation. So I think us, in some ways, may have had a bit of a lucky escape.
Thanks, Ruth. There's never any easy way to get the money, is there? My governor suggested I sell a kidney.
Knowing your governors, I'm not
I'm not sure we
surprised they
recommend
suggested that.
I'm not sure we recommend that. Doesn't sound like a great option. Okay,
Okay.
That's it. I think that's the last slide on the scheme of financing schools. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Simon. Thank you.
Right, in which case we will go to item 11, the PRU consultation update. This item is for information. I'm going to invite Phil Curd, Head of Education Places, to present.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, just to give you an overview of the PRU consolidation exercise. So it's we have just finished a statutory consultation using the prescribed alteration process, and I'll give you through the slides, give you an overview of what we are doing and why we are doing it and where we are going next with this piece of work. So as an overview, Somerset has 4 PRUs. They are listed there. In addition to that, we have 2 behaviour partnerships in West Somerset and Frome, to whom we delegate high needs funding to take care of a number of our Section 19 duties. Next slide, please. That just sets out where the 4 PRUs are, because it is the PRUs that are the focus of this consolidation exercise, and you can see them mapped there based on their kind of primary location, acknowledging that some of these schools are multiple sites. And we've mapped those into the 6 new education locality areas. So the consolidation exercise is to address inconsistencies across the different parts of the county with 4 schools and 2 partnerships. What we are trying to do in this phase 1 exercise with the 4 pupil referral units is move to a 2-school model to address that consistency element. And each school would have 2 hubs. So over in the west side, we'd have hubs in Taunton and Bridgewater. In the east side, we have Glastonbury and Yeovil using existing PRU buildings. In terms of the benefits as we see them, so consistency of provision, good quality provision, equity of offer in West Somerset and Frome, and that is very much part of a phase 2 to this exercise as we progress into 2026. The opportunity to develop locality hubs, and again that's part of the phase 2, maybe even phase 3, as we become more ambitious and piggyback on the flexible education model and have more in-person learning opportunities for children probably not currently engaged in education. We also look at the opportunity to develop holding roles for children that are missing education. So probably at any point in time we have between 200 and 300 children who are not placed in any kind of education setting. It's hard to have oversight of those children, and the education system in Somerset misses out on quite a lot of funding on the basis that they are not in the system, in the census at any point. There's also the opportunity to refocus resources, and that's very much part of the phase 2. But in terms of the phase 1, streamlining the governance and commissioning activities between the local authority and the PRUs. Design workshops. So how did we get to our proposal? We met with head teachers, management committee chairs and vice chairs, and representatives from the 2 behaviour partnerships to discuss a consolidation exercise back in March of this year. We then had 2 workshops hosted at Poldon Barrow School, and again all of those people were involved in those workshops, and we came up with a proposal that looked at 2 schools, 2 head teachers and an executive head teacher function which would oversee a partnership agreement, would support those head teachers in terms of them personally looking at the consistency of the offer between the 2 PRUs and the quality of provision across the county. So that's what the proposal would look like in the medium term. So in the short term, it's those 2 PRUs East and West each have had their own head teacher and an executive head teacher function, which would provide some level of support based around the partnership agreement, which we need to design. So the proposal in detail was that South Somerset Partnership School would close and that Tor School would be expanded to include all of its sites. Tor School would be renamed and its management committee would be expanded to include members of the management committee from SSPS. That change would take effect on the 31st of March 2026. And then over in the west-hand side of the county, Taunton Deane Partnership College would close. The Bridge School would absorb all of its operations and the Bridge School would be renamed. And again, that change would take place on the 31st of March 2026. Timeline. So the proposal was formalised back on the 9th of July 2025. We then had a formal representation period in line with the guidance for prescribed alterations between the 9th of July and the 12th of September. We've then been considering that feedback, and the final check of the feedback is this Friday, where we take it to our Directorate Management team. And subject to everyone agreeing in that forum, we will be taking a decision to implement the proposal on the 5th of November at the Council's executive. Subject to a decision to implement being taken by our executive, we would then see the two new head teachers start in post on the 1st of January 2026. And then we would work alongside them to transition them to the new two PIU model between the 1st of January and the 31st of March. And then the two PRU model would officially commence on the 1st of April 2026. In terms of the feedback, so that consultation that was hosted on the County Council website through our citizen portal. So we had 71 responses, and from a statutory consultation point of view, 71 responses is quite a high level of responses. And what we've been able to get is a good cross section of feedback from various people and organisations. So you can see we had 5 responses from organisations and 6 were individuals. And having read through all of those responses, you could tell that some were from parents and some were from staff within the pupil referral units. In addition, we had a letter from SASH, which was received from their chair via email. 8 people requested a callback. 7 of those got a call. 1 we couldn't get hold of. Of the individual responses, 19 said they were in favour of the proposals, 46 said they didn't support them, and 1 chose not to answer the question. Of those, 11 mentioned concerns relating to the closure of physical school buildings, which was specifically stated as not being the case. And as we went through the various responses, there were lots of concerns about buildings being closed, and we've no intention to close buildings. And as a result, children having to travel further distances to access PIU provision, which will not be the case, as children will continue to go to the buildings that they attend now, albeit under the guise of a different school name. In terms of some of the feedback, so we had a range of supportive comments and less supportive comments. So the first one is a consistent offer for all students, the introduction of a central team and executive head teacher, and the development of a centralised processes are all positive steps that will improve safety, consistency and quality of provision. I agree with streamlining the delivery to ensure consistency of approach to provide equally for all pupils requiring PIU placements in Somerset. And I wholeheartedly agree with the need for change in the management of PRUs across Somerset. Then on the next slide, we should have some more concerns about the proposals, so that we feel this is a retrograde step in the provision for vulnerable pupils. This provision feels like the first step in reducing provision in an attempt to save money. I feel that there will not be sufficient support for each school due to one head being responsible for all schools in a big area, and consolidation of the already poorly spread PRUs would increase travelling time and non-engagement. Is there one more slide or not? No. So kind of just to close that off, if we can just go back to the timeline slide, Robin, if it's you driving the slides, please. Thank you. That is the timeline. So the next key activity is DMT this Friday. Subject to the agreement to proceed being taken there, we would plan to take this to the council's executive on the 5th of November. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Absolutely. Naomi, first hand up.
I feel like I'm being a bit of a pain this meeting. I do apologise. Phil, that just looks slightly different to the original proposal where there was a consideration for West Somerset. So it may be relevant for you to answer that now, or maybe for us to have the conversation outside, because now we're looking at Taunton Bridgewater as being the closest possible for those children. So that my recollection of the first proposals had some sort of hub or something out in West Somerset, and that looks to have gone. So I'm just wondering what the thinking is around either the partnership working, having just come from that meeting this morning as well, and what that means for that particular area of Somerset.
Thanks, Nate. So if you cast your mind back and the time that we spent at Polden Bower developing the proposal, we very much had to split this work into 3 phases. So phase 1 is the consolidation of the 4 PRUs into 2 PRUs, so an east and west PRU on each side. Phase 2 is about looking at the reorganisation of those PRUs internally to make sure that we have kind of efficiency in the way that the funding or our resources are refocused more on teaching and learning and looking at opportunities to make them more efficient. But that will be very much a role for those 2 head teachers, and we will sit alongside them and support them. But that is not something that we are looking at in this part of the process. There will be formal process relating to any of the activities of that type. And then for September 26, that was when we said that we would look at dissolving the 2 partnership areas in West Somerset and Frome and formally adding those geographical areas to the 2 PRUs and introducing physical hubs for the children there.
So that hasn't changed. That plan is still the same. So the timeline is still the same. Okay, we still have some work to do on that, bridging the gap between the funding March and the 31st of August then, don't we?
We have lots of work to do on all sorts of elements, Monet.
Amongst other things. Thanks, Phil.
Okay, Ruth Hobbs.
Thank you. So my question, Phil, is that it's very evident from the feedback that you've presented today and also from conversations on the ground that there's been quite a bit of confusion around this, and that quite a few people have felt that this has been a closure rather than a changing management structure, for want of a better word. So is there going to be any comms to address that at some point? Would be my
so I'll
first
take that
question.
one first, Ruth.
Yeah,
because otherwise I'll forget what question 1 is by the time we get to question 7. So yes, if we are looking to proceed, we will do a round of comms linked to the decision. We had to use the word closure because we are technically closing 2 schools. Now, what we couldn't do is go through a consultation process and not say closure, because people would say, well, you didn't say you were closing these schools, because technically it is a closure to facilitate an amalgamation.
It's Hernview all over again. Yes, totally get it. That's fine, but I think it'd be helpful to put some comms out around that. And I suppose the other thing that came up quite a lot is around the quality of provision. So it's noticeable that the 2 that we're choosing to close have had some challenges around their Ofsted inspections. So just some reassurance really that the learning from that is going to move forward into the new phase.
Thanks, Ruth. Yes, quality is absolutely key. Consistency and quality are the 2 key drivers for this exercise. It is not about cost saving, albeit in phase 2, when those head teachers look at their new schools in their entirety, they might be able to refocus their resources and have more working directly with children and families. But this exercise is entirely about consistency and quality.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I have one question myself, but I'll wait if there are any other questions. No, Phil, on the slide you've got now, the timeline, it doesn't have the executive head teacher element. And I know from speaking with other head teachers, Sash did quite a big consultation, and obviously you've had the letter which represents their view, but there was concern about the nature of that executive head teacher function being a part-time role for somebody from a specific organisation, and about will there be fair, it's about as much the transparency of it as the reality of it, fair access to provision for all schools when the executive head teacher function comes out of one MAT or one school. That appeared in consultation. Is that model still in here, or are you doing a different model of how that executive head teacher function is going to be run, or is it lost and we just have the two head teachers?
Thanks, Simon. So yes, it is still our intention to have an executive head teacher function within this model. If we take the decision to implement on the 5th of November, we will then progress the HR work to identify and appoint the two substantive head teachers for the two PRUs. At the point that we have those two head teacher designates identified, we will begin working with them and essentially a joint working group of the management committees to define exactly what goes into a partnership, which both pulls the two PRUs together and sets out exactly what we want the executive head teacher function to do in terms of support for the two schools, support for the two head teachers, some kind of quality assurance model that looks at consistency and quality. We also understand that there are concerns in the system about if you appoint a certain organisation, for example, to lead on that function, does that then mean you have inequity of access for certain schools or other organisations to that provision? So what we will have to do is make sure our specification is very carefully considered, is clear in its intent, and then we will go out and seek expressions of interest from relevant parties to provide that executive head teacher function. But we understand the concerns. We have our own. So the next bit, probably before Christmas, is really being clear on what we want that bit to do, and looking at all of the risks and mitigating them as best we can.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Phil. It's a clear answer. Naomi.
Hi, Phil. I just had a really quick one, just a very quick thought about rebranding and rebranding costs when we're renaming things. So obviously there will be a plan to keep that to the minimum. I'm assuming we're rebranding and renaming as part of the whole process, and probably linked to, like Ruth said, some of the Ofsteds and things like that. That might be all part of the plan. But obviously, given we've got no money, we don't want to be spending on that.
No, and kind of rebranding. So I think as part of this exercise, if we're consolidating and we're doing amalgamations, it's often good practice to change the name of schools and give everyone a bit of a fresh start. But clearly, you can have costs associated with that, and we'd have to look very carefully at phasing that in as and when it's affordable. In terms of doing the big corporate rebrand, we have our in-house communication team that can support with much of that at no cost to the two schools. But yeah, all of these things are really valid. And as I said earlier, this exercise is not about saving money and taking resource out of the system. It's about consistency, it's about quality, it's about consolidating what is there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? No, thank you very much, Phil.
Thanks, Simon.
I'll go to item 12. Disapplication exceptional circumstances funding. Again, this item's for information, and I would like to invite Jackie Cotty to speak. Senior Business Partner.
Have we gone to the next slide, please? So yeah, this slide relates to our annual process where we're applying to the DFE for schools that meet their criteria for exceptional circumstance funding. They do provide additional funding for these claims, which will be based on what we put in last year, so it's always a year in arrears, but we will receive extra funding for them, so it's not coming out of the main pot of schools block money. So we wrote out to all schools earlier in September. Hopefully you've seen that. We have had applications, I think, from all the ones that put in figures for last year. But if you've not seen that yet, or you think you might qualify for this year, it's not too late. We do have to get the claims into the DFE by the 17th of November. So we've obviously done this early so we could bring any applications to this schools forum. But if you think you still might have a claim to put in, please do that. We can still apply to the DFE in time for you and get the next schools forum to have a look at that in retrospect. So just to run through the ones that we received so far, we've had from Berkeley, they have £10,000 lease cost for their school buildings, which is the same cost as we had last year. Charlton Hawthorne, again, a lease on the buildings and playing fields, just over 5,000. New one coming in for King Arthur's, which is a lease of their sports hall. Now, they didn't claim last year because the cost of it fell below 1% of their budget. So to apply for this, the cost does have to be over 1% of your budget. We will wait to see whether their figures are over 1% for next year. So we're doing this in principle at the moment, so that should qualify in principle. But we'd have to look at next year's budget figures, as we will for all the schools, to see if it actually exceeds 1% of next year's budget. If it doesn't, we would have to then withdraw the claim later on. Brymore was the biggest one. So this has been going on for many years. As you probably know, they're a rural technology school with a lot of exceptional costs for providing that unique curriculum that they do. So it's over £500,000. And you can see that has gone up. It's gone up compared to last year's application. So we're getting them to provide all that evidence for us at the moment. And the last one at the bottom, Herne View, which did qualify last year, the lease on their buildings on one of their sites. That is actually unlikely to qualify for the coming year because the lease will cease in September as they move to a single site. So it's just to point that out, that we probably will not be applying for that funding for next year because it will be below 1% of their budget. So any questions on that so far? If people are happy with those to go forward, I say we will be applying for that within the next couple of weeks. So the DFE then has to go through their approval process as well before they will accept that to go into next year's APT. Has anybody got any questions or think that they might have a claim that they still want to put in?
No, so just for clarity, Jackie, these are bids made to the DFE, so they don't, if they go through, they don't affect the funding of other schools in Somerset directly.
The only reason it would affect them is because they only fund us in retrospect. So in 26/7, they'll give us funding based on what we applied for in 25/6. So it's always a year behind. But as you can see, with most of these, they are pretty similar year on year. King Arthur's being a new one would impact us for this coming year, and then they would catch up the following year with the funding. So it can have an impact, slight impact on the schools block until they catch up with it the following year.
Okay.
Like a lot of things that the DFE fund for us, they're always a year behind with everything.
So if, for example, for some reason, and I can't think what it would be, Brymore stopped making that claim, that lag fund would be in the positive direction, a significant amount in that first year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, that's fine. Susan Fielden.
I just wondered, Jackie, if you could remind us what we had Haygrove in the list last year, didn't we?
We did. Haygrove's got turned down by the DFE.
Oh.
They did go forward from Schools Forum, but didn't pass their criteria in the end. So we withdrew it, and that put more money back into the school block. They've not applied again this year, not so far anyway. Obviously, because they got turned down last year. They're probably not going to bother.
There are no more questions on this, Jack. This is my lack of knowledge about the technical bit of this. This probably doesn't fit into this area. The PFI schemes, we've got a few schools that are PFI, and that funding kind of comes out before it goes to schools. At what point will that stop? And what will the impact? Do we need to? What's the kind of when will that occur, and what will be the impact on schools' budgets, if any? And will it come into this pot? At that point, will there be a need for exceptional funding as they transition out of PFI? I don't know the timeline and what we're looking at ahead.
So the PFI funding is separate from these. We do get additional funding for the two schools that are in the PFI project. Again, it's based on previous year always, so it tends to lag behind. So it can have a temporary impact depending what we need to give to those schools. to be able to fund the PFI project that they have to pay out. But the DFE do fund that as an additional source. They call it PFI funding, separate from these exceptional circumstances.
And is that in year or is that lagged again?
It's always lagged.
So
And they're also starting to cap it. So they previously always gave us what we claimed the previous year, what we gave to the schools the previous year. They are now starting to put a cap in place on what they'll inflate it by each year.
Okay.
So we had it was only a tiny impact, about £8,000 last year, but potentially it could impact on the school's block, similar to this, because of the time lag.
Yeah. Okay.
Depends on inflation rates as well, because obviously the schools paying out on their PFI are affected by inflation.
Absolutely.
But if the DFE are always lagging it a year, so in theory it'll balance out over the life of the thing. But yeah, in each individual year it can have a slight impact on the school block.
And is it possible to come back to a future meeting with a timeline for when these arrangements cease? So the
PFI running for another 12 years.
Another 12. So we don't need to worry quite yet.
Not just yet. No. Might be retired by then.
Yeah, Naomi.
Yeah. We all want to be retired by then, definitely. Jackie, it was just a quick question just to say, are we confident that we've, covered all the schools that would meet these exceptional circumstances for this funding? Like, the schools inside out. Are you confident in that system that we've got all the right ones here on the screen and that we've not missed any?
Well, we've done a general circular out there, according to all academies as well, because anyone can apply. But obviously we do rely on the schools applying, because they might know about any new arrangements, especially the academies. We wouldn't know what was going on in the academies with these sort of things necessarily. We always contact directly to schools that have claimed before to make sure they've seen it, because we would expect them to have a claim again. Other schools, we're relying on them to pick it up and actually claim if it's a new thing.
I wonder if it's worth, though, just us creating a kind of idiot's guide to disapplication and exceptional circumstances funding for heads to have a quick look at and then respond in case we're missing it, or do you think that's overkill?
There was a circular that went out explaining it all, so that has gone out to email to all academies. It's gone to business managers. It went to heads. I'd have to check for you, but it's on our circulars.
Okay, thanks, Jackie.
Be on our website.
Just don't want to miss a trick right now, do we?
No.
Are there any other questions? No, in which case, thank you very much, Jackie, for the presentation.
No problem.
And that will bring us to our next item, which I need to adjust clearly, because the next meeting, it says there on the 25th of November. However, I think earlier in the meeting, we're identifying an emergency meeting on the 10th. And I assume Robin will send out an invite for that.
Yeah, I'll get the information out in the next couple of days.
Do you have any idea of the proposed timings for that? Because people need to put it in their diaries now.
I believe it's 2 o'clock off the top of my head.
Okay,
and it will just be
we'll
an
send
hour.
but we'll send information out. Brilliant. And I also need to make you aware that the election of the chair and vice chair will take place at this meeting, and more information will be shared with members following today's meeting. Okay, thank you very much. I will notice that our one is in person. There's a CPD session. If there's something you would like to propose for that CPD, then please do contact, because we want the day to be as useful as possible for members. So please do contact by the 17th of October to schoolsforum@somerset.gov.uk, and which brings thank you to everybody who attended. Thank you to all our speakers for their presentations, and I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to Robin.